Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Since today's video is going to be coming out the day before Halloween, I thought it would be fun to take a brief look at the history of Halloween and how it became what it is today. It's believed that Halloween originated from the Celtic tradition Samhain, which dates all the way back to the Iron Ages. Samhain was a celebration into the new year, which was believed to start on November 1st. The celebration also came after the harvest season, right before winter came, which was considered the dark times. And it was believed on October 31st into November 1st, the new year, there was a kind of a blurring of the lines between the living and the dead, and old souls would come back and roam around with the living. As part of the tradition, there were huge bonfires, sacrificial offerings such as small animals and crops, and just kind of an overall party in celebration of the harvest times and celebrating those who had been lost. Now, because they believed that the souls of the dead did come back on this one day, October 31st, to live with the living, it was considered tradition to dress in animal hides and masks to sort of blend in with the dead. Now fast forward a little bit of time into 43 AD when the Roman Empire started taking over. Instead of nixing the tradition altogether, they started combining it with traditions that they also held around the same time of year. The Romans did have a dedicated day in October in which they celebrated all that had passed, so that was already an easy tradition to mix in with the late October tradition of Samhain. And then combine that with the Roman goddess Pomona, who was the goddess of fruition, especially fruits and trees. Instead of doing a bonfire where people would sacrifice animals and crops, they started making offerings of fruit, specifically apples, to this goddess, which is believed to be why things like caramel apples and even apple bobbing has become part of Halloween today. Fast forward a little bit further into the 9th century, whenever Christianity started really just taking over. The Catholic Church wanted an easy way to get people to convert over to their religion, so they started taking traditions like Samhain and making them more about Christian figures. So instead of giving offerings to the goddess Pomona, for example, they started giving offerings to other Christian figures like Mary and Joseph. And keeping within that sort of confined space of the end of October, beginning of November, November 2nd became known as All Souls Day, which is a day that the Christians would honor the dead. All Souls Day was also celebrated with bonfires and peace offerings, and came after All Saints Day, which was on November 1st. All Saints Day was a day where you honored all saints and angels that were part of the Christian tradition, and that day obviously came before October 31st, which, because the Celtics didn't fully give up their tradition of Samhain, became known as All Hallows Eve. So at first what started out as just celebration of the dead became a celebration of gods and goddesses, and now just a celebration of Christian figures, but it was still sort of this 3-day part: All Hallows Eve on October 31st, All Saints Day November 1st, and then All Souls Day on November 2nd. And that's sort of how the tradition stayed. Now fast forward again to the 19th century when America is becoming more colonized. Traditions from Europe were sort of trickling into America, but because it was a new country kind of starting their own things, the celebration wasn't as prominent as it was in Europe. Americans weren't celebrating it the same way. It wasn't until the potato famine in Ireland, which caused an influx of Irish immigrants into America, that we really started celebrating more of All Hallows Eve and into the next November 1st and November 2nd holidays. These traditions still focus mainly around celebrating the death of those who had passed and all their souls, still believing that this was a time for souls to kind of roam around Earth. But fast forward to about the late 1800s, whenever these traditions were really picking up, America wanted to sort of desensitize it and started pushing for communities to make it less about the scary things like the souls passing, the skeletons, the ghouls, and make it more about just community in general. And we started seeing large parties happening where people were dressing up and just celebrating together as a community. The unfortunate part about this is it started removing the history from Halloween, and it became more and more commercialized. And that's sort of where we got the Halloween that we have today. The less it became about the tradition of celebrating the dead, the more it became just about people being able to dress up and celebrate being scary. Now, while I love Halloween, it's my favorite holiday, I do wish that we still kept some of that tradition, honoring those who have passed along, and sort of having a celebration where it's almost like we share a day where the living and dead can sort of live in harmony. By the early 1900s, we started seeing costumes being sold, candy specifically made for Halloween being sold, and even the name itself, Halloween, derived from All Hallows Eve, became shortened into something easier that wasn't as much about the tradition of the dead. Now you might be wondering, where did trick-or-treating come in? Nothing that you've talked about so far seems to even remotely relate to trick-or-treating. So as I said earlier, dressing up was part of the Samhain tradition to blend in with the spirits that were roaming the earth. People also would leave food and offerings outside of their homes on this night, basically as a way to make sure spirits didn't enter their home. It was believed if you didn't leave something out for the spirits, they'd come into your home and either harm you or take things. So people would leave bowls of food, bread, fruits, stuff like that out as basically a peace offering for these spirits. Now, whenever the Catholic Church took over and it started becoming more about Christianity, they started giving food to the poor instead. But it wasn't just, going out and giving out food. It was the poor had to go to the rich's house, knock on the door, and ask for it. Based on how the rich treated the poor back then, I'm assuming they really just had to beg them for the food. But none of the articles I read really specified on that. But basically, the poor would have to go to the richest house, knock on the door, and ask for food. So that slowly started to become part of the tradition, and then whenever it moved over to America, it became more about the children going out and doing this. Now, the trick part to trick-or-treating is still based on the beginning Samhain traditions where they would dress up, people would play pranks or do kind of petty crimes like stealing, and then blame them on these spirits that were supposed to be roaming around. So then whenever it came to America, it became the children dressing up and pulling pranks on adults, basically because they were dressed up and it was harder to identify them. So they'd go around to people saying, if you don't give me something to eat, I'm going to do something to you. And that's sort of where trick-or-treating became a part of this tradition as well. By dressing up, people weren't able to tell who these kids were, so they were able to get away with these tricks, which were really just like petty crimes or just bad pranks, and people would give them food or money to get them to go away. So then, fast forward throughout commercialism, it became popular to dress up and go around asking for candy. And the last bit of Halloween history I'm going to cover is the story behind the jack-o'-lantern. Jack-o'-lantern started from an old Irish myth about Stingy Jack. Stingy Jack, as his name would suggest, was very stingy, and he would make deals with the devil and then take back what he had said. And he kept constantly tricking the devil, doing things like telling the devil, if you climb up to the top of that tree and grab me the fruit, my soul will be yours. But whenever the devil would go to the top of the tree for the fruit, Stingy Jack would carve a cross into the tree, making it so the devil couldn't come down. And whenever Stingy Jack had the devil stuck up in the tree, he told him, the only way I'll let you down is if you promise not to take my soul. And the devil was forced to promise that. Stingy Jack did this to the devil a couple of times. Eventually the devil just stopped even interacting with Stingy Jack, and when it came time for him to die, God said, you mess with the devil too much, I'm not letting you into heaven. But the devil said, I promised you I wouldn't take your soul, so you're banished to stay on earth. And the only thing the devil gave him was a piece of coal, which Stingy Jack, fearful of the dark and the night, knowing his soul was going to just roam around forever, carved out a turnip as a lantern and put the coal inside of that. He then became known Jack of the Lantern, and it was believed that you would see him roaming around with his lantern on All Hallows Eve. Now, Stingy Jack was an angry spirit because his soul was banished to earth. He couldn't go to heaven, he couldn't go down to hell with the devil. So in order to avoid running into Stingy Jack, in Ireland and Scotland, people would carve out gourds and turnips with scary faces, put lights in them, and then put those in their window or outside of their doors to scare off these spirits, basically warding off all angry spirits that weren't allowed to pass on to the afterlife. And then once the tradition got moved to America, they found the pumpkin, which was native only to America and turned out to be just the perfect food to turn into these lanterns. And that's where we get the now tradition of the jack-o'-lantern, of carving out a face into a pumpkin and putting it outside your house on Halloween night. But this was just a little bit of the history behind Halloween. We've unfortunately lost a lot of the old traditions with the commercialization of Halloween, which is just what America does. But when it comes to this Halloween, I hope you guys think about this a little bit, and the traditions behind Halloween basically is a celebration of the harvest and all those who've passed away in the past year. Although Halloween's lost a little bit of that history to it, it's still my favorite holiday and something I love to celebrate. What are you guys going to be this year for Halloween? If anything, you can leave a comment down below, or head over to my Instagram, What a Horror. I'll be making a post about this video as well. But as always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more videos. I put out new videos every Friday. And until next time, stay spooky and happy Halloween.